Commandos Origins asks the question, can just a handful of men trained to kill in competence-porn levels of ability do what entire armies can't? A skewed top-down real-time strategy game where you take on a team of highly trained commandos with some half-baked plans and raw determination and see what you can cook up. As all the Commandos games have done before, and many in this genre, Origins doesn't hand you victories. You make the play, and then the game laughs at you while tearing it up and saying, hey man, didn't you see that guy sitting down for a smoke break, camouflaged from your view and making no sound and covered with a friggin' tent fort of old boxes? And you're like, no dude, I didn't. And then it punches you right in the hubris. Commandos Origins is scheduled for digital release on April 9th, 2025 for PlayStation 5, Xbox X and S, and PC. Additionally, digital versions for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One are expected at some later time. Let's see if Commandos Origins can deliver the goods. Thumbs up if you like games, subscribe if you love them, and thumbs down if you just somewhat do. Here's my review for Commandos Origins. Military issued bear traps, why you should listen to your mom's warning about not jumping in mud puddles, and the usefulness of a well-timed look over here distraction. Origins is a sequel-prequel, diving back into the very start of the elite squad led by Jack O'Hare and telling the story of when the entire group met up. Real-time strategy with you spreading out your brains across the assorted men of action, sneaking around, taking out enemies, planting traps, stealing plans, and consistently punching a fat five-knuckle fist wrapped in the flags of various ally nations into the craw of the Fur's plans. And to do that, every operative in the game comes with their own gimmick, like they wandered in from a completely different genre of game. Each one is a misfit action figure with their own ridiculous skill set. It's your job to take whatever teammates are assigned to you through this ever-growing series of levels and get the objectives done, whatever the cost. Well, the cost is pretty much known, actually. If anyone on the team dies at all, it's mission over, and you reload a save or an autosave. The game's huge in both scope and scale, with you traveling all over the war-torn areas, but also just the pure map design is large. And especially because a lot of it is about stealth, a lot of the times you're on your belly rustling through some grass. Here, you'll typically start each mission really heavily outnumbered and outgunned. You'll survey this large map filled with enemy soldiers, vehicles, and obstacles, and to succeed and get your way through it, it requires a lot of careful observation. You have to look at enemy patrol routes, vision ranges. You have to move stealthily. You have to use disguises, creative use of items or environments to kill the enemy, and then precisely adjust and identify coordination between your operatives to take out multiple enemies at the same time by holding down a button and doing a coordinated one-move effort. But really, make no mistake, the cornerstone of this is stealth. Enemies have a field of view cone that is shown on the map indicating the area that they can see, a core mechanic returning from all the classic games. If you manage to sneak up behind them, you can perform a silent takedown. Those cones have different elements to them. A solid element means no matter what happens, if you get into it, they're going to alert, and a more bar graph style element indicates that you'll have a little bit of time to move through it, or you can just basically stay stealth and not moving and they won't notice. There's also the option to knock them out non-lethally, which can be useful for minimizing noise, but I gotta tell you, ultimately I found that the best bet was to bleed them out and put them in the bushes, because if you don't take all the right steps to keep them from waking up, they can alert from behind you, shaking their head groggily, then sounding the alarm, which is an absolute shitter. Now, getting to them is also different depending on which of Hitler's henchmen you end up going against. The normal soldiers are easy enough. Usually you can sneak up to make sure someone far off isn't overlapping them on an overwatch and take them out. Officers are smarter, they're harder to trick, and they only follow diversions for super small sections of time. While enemy snipers and machine gunners and true guards, they usually don't leave their post unless the world is on fire, and being on the other end of a machine gun in the game is a one-ticket trip to dirt nap time. The game also has some characters that, let's just call them non-combatants, but to me, if a mechanic smashes you in the face with a wrench, that is combat. Mostly they just cower or run off to set the alarms. Now, speaking of alarms, this is a big deal in the game. The first trigger will send nearby enemies to investigate, and if alarms go off repeatedly, the alert level escalates. Notably, if you trip the alarm 3 times on a mission, the entire map goes on high alert, causing reinforcements, the entire basic might of the enemy, to actively hunt your team. And let me tell you, that comes up later in the gameplay section a little bit more. Your best bet in the game is to understand that each one of them has their own particular skills, but also being aware that enemies are going to notice if conversations don't continue or comrades aren't in particular locations that they were prior, and so sometimes having to do things together. This can also mean having to adjust each particular commando. For example, some commandos knock out enemies, while others stab them and kill them right away. The difference, as I said, between the two is ultimately, as you would assume, unless zombies become a thing, the stabbed enemies don't just stand up and roll around a little bit and then call everybody. So you really have to identify who you're going to knock out, who you're going to stab, where you're going to hide them, and how you're going to go about it. Knocking somebody out and putting them in a bush usually stops them from ever getting back up, though. Be aware of that. And then you have the tools. For example, some commandos have remote detonators and explosives that can be used to take out bridges, vehicles, or people, depending on how you want to use them or just how much anarchy you want to cause. I can say this is going to come up a lot, but geometry for the vision cones of enemies can get downright frustrating in this game. Sometimes in a busy section for no reason, usually trying to indicate how light sources affect those areas and vision, you can sometimes see just different series of geometric patterns that indicate different levels of vision. Now that's fine, but it can look like the game almost has graphical glitches with a semicircle overlapping a half circle, overlapping some freakish rendition of a sales chart. Also incredibly tight when it comes to enemy vision, if not downright off sometimes, is that even if a single pixel in an enemy cone is viewable, it's going to get you searched for. I don't have a problem with that. That's not a bad thing. But the way the levels are structured, this can result in you zooming in and out like some fucking dude without bifocals, trying to make sure that one move won't trigger screw you into another. The problem here is, randomly, the enemies trigger when I was outside the cone, slightly, with no movement whatsoever. I became pretty accustomed to this, and I just considered it to be the risk of being even a little too close. So if one sees you, the entire close area instantly knows where you are, and the softer secondary areas know that something's up. You don't usually hear those call-outs because it's so fast. That's fine, but it is something to be aware of. Also, a single guy with a baton can kill someone when things go loud because there is no AI for the other teammates when you're in battle in real time. So if everything goes loud, and it does, the enemy's running real speed, and you're still stuck controlling the group as separate units unless you switch that over. And of course, some will be prone, some will not. They're going to move at different speeds. Since those characters have no AI at all, you're going to have 6 to 8 bullets from that initial guy when this goes to full speed. And the moment you're out, you need to figure that out and switch in real time again, remembering that the other 2 characters are never doing anything during those moments. In that way, it can feel rough, especially when those vision cone mechanics start to pop up. Also, combined with the alarm system, let me describe this for a second. If an enemy sees you, 1 stage alarm goes off, no big deal. 2 local alarms, still not resulting in a complete base activation. Once you get 3, then enemies come in reinforcements. Now, at first, it seems like that might be a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card, and it can be. But as you consistently work through some really tightly set encounters, sometimes it actually makes sense to work through a location and occasionally trigger one. I have no issue with that. But the alarm system, to me, became a declination instead of a definition of that particular strategy. I mean, 7 Overwatches is one thing, but even on the easiest, this feels penalizing, as if it's almost built into the game and the maps. And these fundle-fingered buffoons are going to have to consistently fight off alarm systems instead of ghosting through the levels. It felt, in particular, in some of the middle levels, that the entire game was sort of set up to make sure that that happened multiple times. It's a tacit demonstration of flexibility falling under a system that sounds good, but in practice collapses the core gameplay a bit too much. In some places, there are only 1 or maybe 2 ways through it all, so much so that the game gives you a special item just for a specific thing it wants to show you or have you do to get past. And it feels like you're funneled to do those particular actions in the game, where instead it's supposed to really be about the flexibility. In some locations it is, in others, man, it was really frustrating. So one way I got through it was to pretend it was like an old 1980s movie where someone on the good guys team just sort of yells, "Fuck it," and shoots, and everyone has to deal with their abundant over-enthusiasm for bloodshed. But the game's one down, you're all out death mechanic doesn't let your stupid gun-rushing heathen die a cool death. It just means death for everybody. Commandos at first glance looks pretty good. It even gets better as the levels grow later on, starting out with those somewhat funnel designs for teaching you the first level and its basic intrinsic movements for all the characters. You have a desert base level that's wrapped and interwoven in some very complex designs with meandering roads filled with enemies, a truck you can drive like 20 feet to another checkpoint, and some other diversions. I really love that one. Then there's a snow level whose complexity isn't in the size as much as the feeling that if a bunch of soldiers had to protect a single base in the Arctic, they would not only be on high alert, but on the watch for anything, unless of course they were worried about the inevitable Emperor Penguin blitzkrieg. But the idea of getting in there and the difficulty of doing so resonated with me. Jungles, deserts, forests, huge complexes, and I do mean complex, has you mapping and remapping all your plans consistently. And because apparently this is Overwatch the game, you have to always be on the lookout for Overwatch chains of enemies, where one guy's death means a daisy chain of reaction that feels like its entire computer screens across. But one place where Commandos shines, one of the best parts that I've seen, and it's been in other games that copy at least some of this, but wholly different in the presentation here and something akin to Sniper Elite, is so many locations have objectives that blossom out at first, starting from perhaps finding particular paperwork that indicates the enemy will go to this place next, or maybe you need to assassinate a troublesome bad guy from a point as you explore. More and more, though, objective quests are popped up, and I was just consistently tracking each one of those down. There's this excellent feeling of exploration that almost naturally is tied into it, and the feeling of constant discovery never really goes away. Even in the last level, I was just always looking for that next new thing. I do wish the consistent discovery wasn't usually tied to a very particular agent and what he can do. For example, let's say you have 3 commandos and one of those commandos has the ability to detonate something. You're most likely going to find out in that mission that the end of the level requires you to blow something up. No big deal. But to get to that spot, you won't be able to go there in the normal way because that character can't, for example, climb down rock ledges like the Green Beret can. And this can be ultimately frustrating when you see a chance and you can't do it so many times. The idea of going in smartly, going in discreetly, and utilizing the particular set of skills that all these Liam Neeson copies seem to have can't be done. Ultimately, what happens is you have to use one character to go around and kill a bunch of characters so that the one that has the demolitions can go through the slaughter zone. It's not as enjoyable as it could have been if they were a little bit more freeform with that. Commandos is first and foremost a thinking man's strategy game, though, and even in the first bits of the level, you're going to be tasked with taking multi-step actions. I liked that. But it does have a lot of idiosyncrasies that seem completely confusing. For example, when looking around the map and deciding where to move, there's no waypoint viewable unless you're in the stance you need to get all the way to that point. Let me explain that. So, for example, if something's between you and the waypoint and it requires you to be prone, but you're standing at the time you're actually looking around, the waypoint doesn't show up as something that you're able to travel to. The only way to really guess that you can get there is to hit the area, send your Marine off for just a brief moment, and listen for an audio cue that says yes or I can't go there. Also, when going into different maps, each squad member seems attached to his unit designation, like retiring a fucking military jersey, meaning if you have mission members 3 and 4 in a mission, they don't become 1 and 2. They stay 3 and 4, meaning 1 and 2 on your number system on your keyboard are just not used. And luckily, due to how the gamepad works in this game, that doesn't become an issue, but on the keyboard, it does. It's just weird. Also, the bugs. It is very buggy. I switched to a gun to shoot somebody and the gun hovered like 7 feet away from me like I was playing a video game version of the movie Wanted. And since the guns and bullets came from 7 feet away, I couldn't shoot an enemy because it was behind a wall, even though I wasn't. Also, enemies ragdoll endlessly, sometimes for minutes, and that means even if you hide them, they can ragdoll, and an enemy may see that even if you've moved well beyond it. I had an enemy ragdolling who was dead, and while hidden, normally, one toe must have come across the line and out of the bush, and a far-off enemy reacted as if I was still there shivving people. The game also sometimes will have your commando not be able to assassinate somebody, so they're just going to crawl around the enemy's feet, never getting up to do it, setting off alarms. While the game does have its split screen and co-op online functionality, some of this is going to be mitigated because of that, and you don't have to worry about the game's lack of AI for the soldiers mattering if things go loud, which are awesome. A lot of these bugs are still going to be with you. But as they say, it's always better with friends. Many times Origins puts its best foot forward and good things come of it. It's an official sanctioned steel-toed boot, which is also good because more than likely it's going to step on your toes a couple dozen times as you try to do anything. Let's talk about graphics and doing stuff. Commandos, especially the often complicated level designs, can look extraordinary. Some of the later levels have you infiltrating enemy islands on rafts and working on windy and rainy coasts, as your background is just the right military motto for going places, seeing legendary locations, meeting interesting people, and killing them. This all makes sense. It's that particular spot that impressed me. Sadly, the game does have a number of graphical issues, as I talked about. Ragdolling enemies animated 4 to 5 feet past the actual location of me killing them, which made it look like a ghost double was choking them out, or picking up a body and having to watch your character pop into and out of a standing position multiple times before grabbing them. Up-close models are also really rough as hell in cutscenes. Luckily, there aren't a ton of them, but the game does suffer from a lot of graphical oddities. Performance overall isn't one of them. While not the most performant, it does hit pretty much where I expected. Graphics, it runs well all the way down to the 2080 at 1440p with some settings adjusted. It was always above 60, with the 3080 hitting the same at 4K with most settings. And the 4090 ran without any real issues, though there is some stutter when moving across the larger maps as elements are loaded in for the first time, which I got to admit, there are times where it does feel like there's a bit of unreal stutter to me in this. I even tried this on the old 780M mobile device. It did very well because there's also upscaling here, FSR and DLSS support here for any user, as well as a base resolution setting if you want to use the game's internal upscaler. The recommended specs are well in line, if not higher, than what it actually requires, and a good number of options are here. You have shadows and textures, draw distance, effect levels. Overall, none of those seem particularly taxing when it came to frame rate. Shadows is probably the biggest offender, and even on low, the game doesn't look bad. Commandos looks its best when it's spread out like a board game in front of you, or zooming in and setting off a trap, capturing a Nazi in a bear trap, and then knowing that his best friend running to his aid is going to get caught in the electrified pools of water you just charge to 100% by flipping the generator on. It looks its worst, well, sometimes at those exact same moments. Let's talk about voice. When it comes to voice, there's very few here. It's just a couple one-liners, some particular barks from enemies, as well as little chirps of data that are given out during the deepest of deep infiltrations, where somebody finds something particularly funny about the way an enemy dies, or why they want to warn you out of using maybe a resource you have in a particularly nice way, because you might know that it needs to be used later. There's a lot of chatter from these 4 or 5 guys sneaking in behind enemy lines, shivving the shit out of everybody, but it's not a great deal of voice. Musically, this game is exactly what you would expect. It's got some patriotic jams blowing out over invisible loudspeakers in some parts, but for the most part, it is sedate background music that trumps up during some combat. That is simply what they were offering, and I liked it. It overlaps onto the sounds of anarchy that sort of blast out when you end up setting off an alarm by adding another orifice to an enemy, though, and I would say it wasn't here nor there. It wasn't music I would listen to outside of the game, but it didn't detract either. When it comes to the sound, this is pretty good. The game works well. You got a lot of environmental sounds. They indicate whether you're in the Arctic, in the desert, or in some deep Pacific forested-looking area, though, of course, you wouldn't be there for these quests. And otherwise, I would say it's got a far-off crack of a gun shell here or there, the sounds of far-off explosions in battle that do quite well. As a game, I would say the audio, pretty good. When it comes to the fun factor, I expected and will always expect these games to be ruthless. I'm fine with that. Even on story mode, the game's relentlessness in enemy output, inconsistent overwatches and in locations seem like they aren't really hard nuts to crack. They're uncrackable safes that you send a bunch of nuts to try to get into. I just don't get frustrated with well-reasoned difficulty. I mean, you're a couple of dudes going against an overwhelming tide of other dudes who can't draw a cross straight and won't bend their knees when marching. It seems like it's going to be a fun ride. I did keep coming back for more as well, but true frustration to me is a sign of a problem in a game like this, and Commandos had a lot of that. It has what it takes and what it needs, but it is not there. Bugs are rampant, and even if they're not, there's a lot of odd design decisions that just consistently hampered my fun factor through this. Playing a Commandos game should feel like executing a high-stakes chess match against 9 players at once, where one wrong move can spell disaster. It requires patience and creativity, and rewards all that. But the game's problems with animations, odd designs in the information it gives, mistakes in the enemy AI, as well as your own, means that it feels more random than it ever really should. I can't say it wasn't fun. Sometimes. I mean, entire platoons got offed and 2 of your dudes waltz in with a bear trap and kills half the German army in a city. That's awesome. And in some of the levels, the game's oddities don't crop up or aren't as noticeable just because of their setting, but they feel like they are just there waiting. Rating. Sadly, here, even with a lower cost, which is $45.99, I can't say to get this right now. I think it needs a lot of tender, loving care. It needs some balance, a large number of bug fixes, and some shoring up across the board, because the game's bugs and weirdness surpassed even the coolness of seeing how these characters met and going on another adventure, or their first adventure, whatever. This is a game where the characters are so badass that breakfast is a menage well, whatever 15 in French is, and I would have loved to have seen that. But there were so many mistakes and so many oddities that it always felt like a group of buffoons in a Naked Gun version of a World War II movie. And I think it needs some fixing. Regardless if you get it or love it right away, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. If you get a chance, give this a thumbs up, subscribe, give it a thumbs down if you love games. Peace out, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week, and keep an eye out for more videos coming from me.
You know, I've been wondering, how come I end up in the bleakest places whenever I'm sent out with you?
I could say the same.
What's so important shipping us out in the middle of the night? It's just another island infested with krauts?
We've lost contact with the local resistance group. We're tasked to investigate what happened.
I would have expected you to send me to a battlefield where I could actually make a difference. And not some godforsaken camp of frozen krauts.
This is what makes the Commandos special. We aren't sent into the meat grinder at the front. We strike where it'll hurt the Germans most, deep behind enemy lines.